Hi folks, just a quick video for you before you've got the paper 2 exam, just to give you some tips really to help you out prior, like with like timing and such. Obviously the videos themselves were to supplement and help your revision, especially as I couldn't be there to help you as myself in person. So I hope they have been of assistance for people who's watched them now. The paper itself is broken into 3 sections again. I would again recommend the 35 minutes per section rule. When you get your explain questions, as I'll come on to, it is basically a test of your knowledge. The first question on the paper should be one that asks you, it'll be in the Roaring Twenties section, about what you can learn from the source. So the what you can learn from a source question, or what the source shows you, is basically what's directly obvious. It should be worth 4 marks, this. What's directly obvious, and then what's inferred to you, so what's hinted to you. And this should be the first question on the paper. So I've got one in front of me, and I'll just read it out and then pick a couple of points out, the difference between what it shows you and what it tells you, like hints to you, so you can get the extra marks. You should only spend 5 minutes on the 4-mark question at the start, okay? And this is only in the first section. So it says, what can you learn from the source about American society in 1918? It's from an American school textbook published in 1961. It says the First World War revealed some alarming facts in regard to our foreign population. 1. Many immigrants neglect to become American citizens. 2. Radical labor agitators were suspected of taking their orders from Moscow. 3. Over 1,000 newspapers in the USA were printed in foreign language. 4. Over 10% of the people here couldn't speak English. And 5. American labor leaders were disturbed over the incoming foreigners who were used to working for low wages. So the obvious marks are just what it tells you. So some immigrants didn't become Americans, they didn't become American citizens. 10% of the people here didn't speak English, like that type of thing. And just picking directly out the source will be enough to get you a couple of marks, and sometimes that's all you can see, because I actually think it's the hardest question on the paper, because what it's hinting to you isn't always directly obvious. Now what it hints to you, infers to you, is where you can read between the lines and work something out. So it says radical labor agitators were suspected of taking their orders from Moscow. So it tells you that Americans were worried about the Red Scare, the spread of communism, because communism originated in Russia. The clue is Moscow, that's the hint. Over 1,000 newspapers in the USA were printed in a foreign language, is telling you that it's become a multicultural society. Okay, foreigners who were used to working for low wages would tell you basically that Americans were worried about losing their jobs to immigrants because they would do the job cheaper. Okay, but the key one, the easy one, there's the Moscow one, the link to communism. It's a hint, okay? So 4-mark question should be the starter, 5 minutes. Your next question will be a knowledge-based question, usually asking you to explain. 10 minutes. Use your knowledge, explain, answer the question. So if it asks you about explain the consequences of prohibition, talk about Al Capone, talk about the rise of the gangster, talk about bootlegging, talk about the breaking of the alcohol rules, talk about speakeasies, etc. The third question should be a 10-marker, asking you how useful a source is. I don't know how clearly this will show up, but that there's the front cover of the Sears Roebuck catalogue from 1927, and a question that's being used before is how useful is this source for learning about like the living standards in America during the Roaring Twenties, for showing the Roaring Twenties type lifestyle. Now, this is not asking you just to look at the source of what it shows you, but you need to understand what the source does show you. So if we look at the source, you can see very clearly in this, it says here the world's largest department store, right? So it's telling you buy for the world's largest department store. It's emphasising the Roaring Twenties, so it's believing in the fact that it is booming, it is great. You've got here a girl with a bobbed hairstyle in the bonnet, so it's hinting towards flappers. And you can see here two richly dressed white Americans, basically with the footstool and the posh little Scotty dog down there. Okay, so it's an affluent style lifestyle, so it's hinting to you that Americans doing great. It is the roaring that is the Roaring Twenties, and it's everything you've heard. Okay, now you're really then being asked, how useful is this source for learning about the lifestyle of Americans in the 1920s? So it is useful for showing the richer 50%. So if you remember before, you'd use your knowledge to back it up. These are the richer 50%. So it's useful for showing you here, if you use your knowledge to back it up, it's useful for showing you the richer 50%, the people who were doing well in American society. It's supporting this image of the Roaring Twenties, so it is useful for that. If you notice, you're using your knowledge to go further. It's also useful for showing you the change, the emphasis in women's fashion. So again, it's useful, you can see there, I hope, for showing you the uses, the positives of the source. Talk a bit about flappers, talk about the change in women's fashions. Obviously there's this image of prosperity. People did want to live the American dream, so it's useful for showing people the American dream and what people would aspire to. Also, because it's 1927, which it tells you at the top along here, it's pre-depression, so it's useful for showing what the lifestyles of people who did enjoy the 1920s benefits were like. You'll also notice on the front of this, so I've put here American Dream with the Roaring Twenties, white people. So it's clearly white Americans who are enjoying the American dream. So it's useful for showing, again, those who benefited in the 20s were obviously the white Americans. However, it is not useful as well at the same point in time, and it is not useful for showing the the other 50%. So in the bottom corner, I'm just going to question, what about the other 50%? And that other 50% we're talking about, right? So I'll just hit it. The other 50%, you'd be talking about black Americans. You'd be talking about those who were like farmers. You'd be talking about immigrants. It doesn't show you any reflection of like the rise of the gangster. You know, the fact that black Americans probably wouldn't be able to afford to buy from this. Also, it's showing you nothing to do with immigrants. These don't look obviously to be immigrants. It's got no reflection of that 50% who couldn't buy from this. The source is useful for showing you as well. If you look at the background of it, it's a catalogue, right? So it is a catalogue, this source. Now the source is a catalogue. That is useful, in my opinion, because it's showing you that like Americans could buy these luxury products actually on credit, so you could get them without having to go and like throw your money down straight away. So you might want to buy like an Xbox or a PlayStation now. You don't have to buy it outright. You can pay it off monthly or weekly. Same thing then. You can buy these luxury products, if you remember, hire purchase. Okay, so it's useful for that. It's useful to show the catalogues that have brought these new products to everybody. But you've got to bear in mind that the idea from this, in this source, is the purpose of it was to get people to buy. So it is going to show, right? It is going to show the purpose. It even tells you buy at the top for the world's largest department store. It's showing you the perfect life. So it's basically the purpose of the source is to get you to buy from here. So it's going to project a positive image. It's not going to show the black Americans. It's not going to show the immigrants who struggled, the other 50%, right? They aren't going to be there. So the purpose of the source, of course, was to project a lifestyle that you could aspire to have, and that's the couple with the dog living, you know, like living the American dream, living this life of luxury. So you've got to bear in mind that you're going to get a very favourable image on any type of advert for anything. Okay, so when you're looking at the source, use your knowledge for support and or reject it, so why it's useful or helpful to you, and not explain it. Use your knowledge, make sure you explain it, why it is or isn't useful, and if you can, pick up on the purpose of the source. Take the first controlled assessment one. What's it showing you? Use your knowledge. Is this right? Is this wrong? Is it both? Use your knowledge to, argue with the source or support the source or both, and then talk about the purpose and how it affects it. It should be worth 10 marks plus 3 spag marks. You should be taking around 20 minutes on this question. In the second parts of the paper, it's the same, so I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Your 8 mark questions will be ones asking you explain, describe something. You basically use your knowledge. You've got about 10 to 12 minutes, because each section again will be 35 minutes. So for your 2 section B questions, so I think it should be Nazi Germany and civil rights, use your knowledge for the 8 markers, answer the question, 10 to 12 minutes each time. And then for the essays, they're worth 12 marks plus 3 spag marks. So make sure that you've got your basics, like your paragraphs and punctuation with spag questions. Do it right. Do your best with your spelling. Remember capital letters for names of people, places. And with your essay questions, it's going to give you a statement. So something along the, let's think of a classic one. For the Hitler section, you might get asked, the Reichstag fire was the main reason that Hitler was able to become dictator in Germany. Führer, do you agree? So you would argue the case for the Reichstag fire, and then you could go against it, and you could argue about like the importance of the Night of the Long Knives, the Enabling Act, the oath of loyalty from the army towards Hitler, that type of thing. With the civil rights section, you could get asked, again, you could be asked a myriad of questions here. Something along the lines of Martin Luther King was always a highly successful protest organizer. His protests were the main reason civil rights advanced in the 60s. So you would talk about the positives of King, remember I've put in there 1960s, so you could say about like what role he had when he had the Children's Crusade, whether you think that was good or bad. You could weigh up the success of the I Have a Dream speech and what followed. You could talk about the Civil Rights Act that passed because of King, especially the 64 one. But then you could also talk about, well, what's Black Power coming about? Sure, does it show that Martin Luther King was losing his influence for a reason? You could talk about the impact of Black Power. You could talk about the King's influence might have been on the wane, so you could be talking about like in the mid-60s where he's lost support, he's upset Lyndon Johnson, he's been, like a brick thrown at him when he's in Chicago. You could talk about the Watts riots being everything that King stood against, when he's asking for peaceful protest. And black Americans did the opposite. And you could even talk about, did his assassination almost allow the 68 Civil Rights Act to come through, because it was almost like a sympathy thing for him. Okay, so in the second section, 10 to 12 minutes for your first question on the Nazis and the civil rights topics, 20 to 22 minutes on your essay questions. It's asking you, do you agree? Answer the question, but you should be bringing in 4 to 5 points. So I'll use the example again. Reichstag fire was the main reason Hitler was able to become Führer. Do you agree? 4 to 5 points in your answer. So you'd be talking about the Reichstag fire, you'd be talking about the enabling law, you could talk about the banning of political parties which came out of that, you could talk about the Night of the Long Knives and what that achieved, and you could talk about the oath of loyalty. 5 points and then a conclusion. Martin Luther King question, talk about King's triumphs as like a civil rights protest organisers, so things like the Washington March, the Civil Rights Act, Nobel Peace Prize, anything that you think was good from Martin Luther King. And then your bad points you could talk about, if you want to talk about against them, the rise of Black Power, the riots that came, the Watts riots, did his assassination allow a sympathy vote to come through for him? Okay, and get that last Civil Rights Act. But I'll just say it again, 35 minutes for each section. Okay, you've got an hour and 45. Remember the spag marks, look where they're placed. Cater your answer appropriately. Good luck, you'll do great. Sorry I couldn't be there.